Okay, it's 12:30, and I think we have to start again. I see I've lost quite a few. How technical? Let me ask you a question. Before we get going here, how technical is too technical? Does anyone have, how about this? I'll start, and if somebody has a question, feel free to shout, raise your hand, stop me somehow, okay? We'll get going. All right. I got to turn on my drone voice here a little bit. Okay. No offense to the applications, but we're not really going to cover applications too much. Mainly because I think most of us know how to point and click. What we want is this, right? We want to look a little bit under the hood, see where we're going. We're not going to do it on my laptop, though. We're instead going to make an SSH connection through the shell to my machine, Cam Law, sitting back in Camden, New Jersey. You can try to hack my password all you want. I don't think you'll get very far. For those of you who are interested, I have this really nifty little password card, single sign-on password. It's got like a PIN code. I type in a PIN on this card, and it gives me a one-time password, and I log into my Linux box with it. Really, really cool stuff. If your university IT department doesn't already use stuff like this, forget about it. You can't afford it. I know. Unless you want to spend like $30,000 on startup, and then the maintenance cost probably of $5,000 or $6,000. You're not going to get very far. Okay, here we are at the prompt. This prompt can look like whatever on your machine. Mine is different. I put the host name in and just that, and I don't put the working directory in or anything like that. That's really besides the point. You can see that, hey, I'm doing pretty good, 80 days of uptime. Okay. I put that in again. That's not the standard thing. If you want the uptime command, you would just type uptime, if I can type correctly, and you would get the same information. You can see I'm running kernel at the top, 2219, SMP, symmetric multiprocessing. The date and time I compiled it, Tuesday, April 3rd, 2201. Who wants to take the math guess here? If you take 80 days back, you hit April 3rd. Okay, what's that mean? It means the last time I booted was when I did a kernel upgrade to 2219. I'm running on i686. That's a lot of different type of processors. In this case, we can find out a little bit more. One of my favorite places to live is in the proc directory. In there, you've got a lot of different files, directories. A lot of it's process table stuff, hence the name proc. There's my K core, looking pretty big. It's 1 gig. It means we have gigabyte of memory. You can get that with the free. You can see we're running the Mega RAID stuff because we've got hardware RAID in the box. We're running RAID 5. Some things you can find out by looking in this directory, in case you want to know more about your system, is CPU info. I'll tell you that we're running genuine Intel Coppermine Pentium 3 800 megahertz processors. And we've got processor 0 and processor 1. Just a dual processor. Nothing behind that. We got 1,592 BOGO MIPS, which is basically bogus. Doesn't really stand for that much. The other thing you can find is your PCI information. You can find out about all the different PCI devices in your system, memory addresses, those types of boring things. Nice thing is, you probably don't need to know this. Most people are going to be concerned with like the free command, which is going to tell them memory information. This is pretty nice. It's very misleading though. If you look at the memory command, you'll see that we've got a gig total. We've got 966 used, and we've only got 69 free. People might look at that and say, John Mayer, we need to put a little bit more memory in the machine because it's low. I thought that was funny Elmer said that, but it's all right. But what's important to look at is the buffers, which is kernel. It's buffering the memory. And you can see basically what's happened there is a transition between the actual official memory and then back into buffers, and we've got 700 megs sitting there. And then we've got the swap, which is just hard disk space of half a gig of swap. And it's just initialized, so we've got a couple megs being used there for initialization. Basically what this means is that on our machine with 1 gig of memory, we're doing okay. And it was really cheap. When we bought the machine, it came with 500 megs of memory. For us to upgrade from 500 to 1 gig cost us, I think, somewhere in the area of $300 or $400. The machine, it's a Dell PowerEdge 4400. It's got like 8 memory slots or something. And when we bought it, we bought two 256 meg DIMMs. So we've got a lot of room for growth. Recent advancements in the kernel allow you to take your system memory right out of the box. You can take it to 2 or 4 gigs of system memory for no problem. You can get patches and stuff to go above and beyond that if you want. Another common command is df, which tells you your disk file, disk usage. My partitioning scheme, actually, I just took the default that came with the box. You can see we've got some NFS mounts coming over for our home directories. So it's working pretty okay. Now, in the services, the etc. directory, which is where you can configure most things. 2 really important files to look at are hosts allow and hosts deny. Most services on Linux use those 2 files for access control. Anything they might not use it natively, but they can use it either through, on this machine's case, inetd, or if you're using the later revision of Red Hat or any of the other operating systems that have moved to X inetd, which is a different configuration file, and I'll show you the 2 differences there between them. For instance, CAML is running Red Hat 6.2. My laptop's running 7.1. So CAML has inetd, and the laptop has X inetd. That's just the configuration file for different services. So like if you were to look in this file, you'll find, oh my, permission denied. What's up with that? One thing, hey, I'm a security buff. So you look. One of the things they recommend is, hey, if you're a normal user, right, you can make your etc.rcd directory read-only, because when you think about it, the average user doesn't need to look in there. They don't need to see what services you're initializing. I think a common mistake is sometimes you have services that need to start, maybe you need to have a password or something. And so by making the directory read-only, you kind of limit yourself. So here's a magic thing. We have, yeah.
Can you just
bigger? Yeah, but the only thing is my font size. Let me see if I can change my font size. Give me a second here. Give me a second. Okay, now settings. Font. Huge. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. Another thing that we've done at Rutgers is, along with the single sign-on password solution, we've come up with the concept of what we call the slide group. It's sort of like Wheel. For those of you that aren't familiar with Wheel, it's sort of like the who can become root. You can use Wheel group for different things. One, you can use the Wheel group for people who can become root and they know the password, or you can use the Wheel group for people who can become root without knowing the password. We use a utility called slide, which allows you to become root without password. Now, you might say, well, what are the benefits of doing that? Well, one, there's no concept of a root password on our systems. Root password does not exist. At least I don't think so. Maybe I'll be proven wrong here. There's my shadow file. You'll notice there's no root password. Here's the interesting thing. Look at my password. I always love my big dream at night when I dream and I think, geez, I'm going to get hacked, is that someone's going to try all this work to get my shadow file so they can crack my passwords. And they're going to spend all this time, they're finally going to get it, they're going to look at it and they're going to be like, what the hell is this person doing? Now obviously, this isn't stuff that you can necessarily do without some other additional utilities. But anyway, that's one of the things we do. So, in the inetd config file, you'll notice that I've turned off most services. But if you look down at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that we have POP3 and SPOP3 running. And we have on POP3, you'll notice this TCPD. Does everybody know what that is? It's TCP wrappers. That's that. There's two files. I said host allow, host deny. We're going to get to them in a second. But what this means is that TCP should actually be the wrapping, TCP wrappers, around and executing IPOP3D, the actual POP3 server. Just for reference purposes, the line below it is for SPOP3, which is secure POP3. That's SSL protected POP3 server, encrypted, right? Who in here knows that every time you check your email with like Eudora or Outlook Express or Netscape Mail that's not using either SINet or SPOP3, your password, your username and password are going in clear text over the network, and anyone who's sniffing has gotten your username and password. Now you might say, well, geez, why offer both POP3 and SPOP3 if you're saying POP3 is not secure? And unfortunately, we have utilities that, and I'm going to get to in a few minutes, that require POP3. And we have some local, over that local, local host coming back for IMAP, so that's actually being wrapped. Secure. The other thing too is actually lack of client support. If somebody's using client Y that doesn't support the encrypted protocols, then you need to use that. But for SPOP3, you'll notice that we're using this thing called Stunnel, which is actually the freely available SSL wrapper for applications. Now, Stunnel incorporates TCP wrappers, and hence that's why you don't see TCP. Now, going down the rest of the list, you'll see more and more stuff, and that's besides the point. Now, one thing I recommend is whenever you start with host deny, I always put all, which means all services, and then I say all at all, which means the first all before the @ symbol, a lot of people don't do. I think this is really neat because it allows you to tell very quickly whether you're dealing with a script kiddie or whether you're dealing with someone more serious. And the reason being is when you say all in front of the other all, it says go back to the machine that's connecting to you and try to use identification services to query the username that's running that application on the remote machine. Now, sometimes people install Unix and the default install turns on the identification services. They log in as root and they launch an attack against you. What this does is says, hey, record the username. So when I look through my logs and I see all of the denied attempts, I see root at this, root at that, root at this, root at that. And I'm like, hey, that's a script kiddie. You know, it's kind of neat. You sort of know the level of person that you're attacking. But the essential gist of this file is to block all services for all hosts and attempt to log the username of the person on that remote host. This is our default configuration. What this says is block everything. We don't trust anything, anywhere, whatever. And then what you do is turn on services. And so what we've done here is turn on services. So right now, anyone who's watching my show can say, hey, I can be on one of those hosts and I can connect, and that's fine. You can go ahead and have your joy. But what this says is that for SSHD, that's our secure shell server, we allow everyone at Rutgers to connect, everyone at DSLconnective.net, that's my home DSL provider, everyone at BellAtlantic.net, that's John Jorgensen's DSL provider. We tried putting DSL.BellAtlantic.net, but Bell uses DHCP for IP address assignment, and as John found out the hard way, his host name sometimes switched between DSL and regular, somewhere else in the BellAtlantic.net realm. So we dropped that. Then we have allathome.com, which is really asking for trouble, but that's Mel's cable modem provider. And then we have all at lawsuffolk.edu. You'll notice that after the all and at symbol at every host we have a period. What that means is allow all hosts within that network in. Now for Suffolk, I could have put at hide.law.suffolk.edu because that's what they're doing for their firewall, their NAT, they're doing network address translation. If you don't know what that is, it's really, we're not going to cover it today, but I can tell you what it is. It's kind of neat idea. But since I did this from home, I didn't know that, just put that in. Then you'll look at FTP services. We allow everyone from Rutgers in because we want the modem pools to be able to come in. We use some different our authentication there, like I showed you with our login, is a little bit different. It's Rutgers specific. So we provide some services that are only accessible via FTP, and so we need to make that available to them. We have all at rcn.com. It's a dial-up provider because we have some student users that are coming in through RCN that need to allow access to FTP. By the way, we don't allow anonymous FTP. I don't really think there's any reason why, especially with the advent of the web, that there should be anything such as anonymous FTP anymore. If you need to make files available to people and you want to do it in an anonymous fashion, I recommend using the web. There's a lot of security holes in FTP, especially when you allow anonymous FTP, and especially if you allow the ability for them to upload. But of course, those types of sites are whereas sites, and we're not doing that, right? So we don't need to worry about that. You'll notice our next, we allow more hosts there, that's developers. And so we move our way all the way down the list, and you can see everything is blocked pretty tight. You have to explicitly allow your SMTP and SendMail, because SendMail is TCP wrappers aware. If you don't say SendMail all at all, nobody will be able to connect to your mail server. Now you might say, geez, that might be, okay, so what's that? Think about it. You can actually do restriction lines and stuff where you can say all at all, and then I think it's exclamation point, and then you could say spammer.spammer.com. And basically what you would do is block all IPs in that network address space from connecting, but allowing everyone else to connect. So TCP wrappers and host allow and host deny allow you to do a lot of different things for connection. Is this all basic stuff? Am I talking this up enough for everyone? You can just say yes or no.
It's fascinating.
It's fascinating. Okay, all right, okay. Now, some other services that we're running. I mean, obviously everyone knows what POP is. Everybody knows what IMAP is. TFTP services. I have a little Cisco router at my house. Okay? So I have to allow DSL connected to do my TFTPs. Okay, I'm not even going to get into what pain in the butt iOS is. But, oh my gosh. Especially when you have a little router and it doesn't have enough memory and you got to constantly pull stuff in and out via TFTP to get enough space to load a new image. It's a real pain in the butt. The last thing is PPTP CTRL. Okay? That's our VPN connection. And you'll see that we allow DSL, at home, and some internal networks to connect to the VPN server. These two are in there because that way we can fire it up and test it from within the building if we need to. The at home is where our dean is. He's the primary user of it. And then DSL is where I am. It's for testing purposes. This stuff works pretty good. So again, I told the website before, I'll tell it again since there's some new faces in here. That's poptop, P-O-P-T-O-P, .lineo, L-I-N-E-O.com. It's free. It's a VPN solution. Obviously, you can run VPN solutions on Microsoft server, but if you choose to do it on something else, it's very well possible. Okay. Some of the other things, let's see what else is here. Name services. We run name server on our machine as well. That's pretty straightforward stuff. Again, some other things that you can do is you have cron, which is automatic scheduling. There's also @ that's installed by default on Linux. We remove @ and easy way to do it on Linux, Red Hat, or any Red Hat RPM-based, I should say. Any RPM-based distribution is to type RPM space -e space name of the package. It'll remove it. Another thing I recommend doing, and since I'm a security nut, I'm going to touch on all of these things as well, is creating an empty file in your etc. directory called cron.allow. And what that is a listing of all usernames allowed to run cron. If you don't have that file in place, put it in place. VXCron, which this is based on, has been plagued with problems. There was a contest a few months ago, probably almost a year now. I think PC World or PC Week took two different competing products. They put one on Linux and they put one on NT. And they said, here are the products. Whoever hacks, we want you to try your best. You're allowed. Go out, try to crack it. Whoever cracks it first is going to get $1,000 or $10,000. I don't remember what it was. But the Linux was all open source. The NT was all closed source solution. The Linux box got hacked, I think, 2 days before the NT box did. The NT box got hacked because somebody had access to the closed source and found the bug in like 5 minutes. Okay? Obviously, that wasn't true on the Linux setup. But what happened was the guy had access to the source. He found the hole, and he exploited VXCron to get root on the machine. You put this in there, and as long as the problem is not with, the cron not being able to, recognize the cron allowed. You can also do cron deny. Cron deny would be if you wanted to specifically deny certain users. So, for instance, if you wanted to only stop Joe Spammer or Joe's, cracker from using cron, you could explicitly deny. I don't think there's that many valid reasons for any normal user to be running cron, especially if you allow multiple logins on your box like I do. I would recommend blocking cron altogether. Some of the other things we provide is we have net news services that work with the university. It's not really worth explaining that because, as with all great things, Rutgers does a really bad job of implementing net news, and so anything I would be to show you would not make sense for your configuration. The other thing is, let's look at the process table. We'll go down some of the different applications that we're running. Up at the top, a lot of this stuff, kflushd, kupdate, kswap, are all kernel type of stuff. You don't really need to be concerned. Those are not user type services. They're all kernel level services that you're going to get anyway. Below that, you'll notice auto mount. What that does is it listens for a directory request, let's say, make it simple, within your configured directory and lets you access your remote NFS share. The nice thing about using that over regular mount commands is that for any of you that rely on NFS services on a remote machine, and actually even though we're going into more technical type talk, a lot of this stuff is not just applicable for Linux, it would also be for any Unix type of implementation that you're going to use. For instance, one of the things that you can get with NFS is called I think it's technically called a spin lock, but I might have the wrong word there. But if you have an NFS mount on your machine, on most Unix machines that aren't using something like auto mount or AutoFS, and the NFS mounted machine goes down, it can cause serious problems with any client computer that's accessing it. For whatever reason, the machine just doesn't seem to like to say, hey, you're not there, goodbye. So the applications like auto mount, and I think ValD or something on Solaris, are the types of applications that would handle that. All of our NFS mounts go through auto mount. What that does is when we have a timeout for 600 seconds, 10 minutes, if the share is not used for 10 minutes, it automatically disconnects it, so you don't have your latency to the network. And when you make a request to that network, it'll reconnect it. So if we looked at our DF again, you'll see that U1 and U2 are being used. But in my previous example of my process table, you'll see that we're also monitoring the news directory. That's for our net news services. So if I was to CD into news lib, it would take a few seconds and come back. And if I brought up my directory list again, you would see that the machine has now automatically mounted the news server and made it available. Our news server crashes a lot. Auto mount's great. If it crashes, we don't have any negligible degradation of service beyond that you can't use news TIN for net news, but you have access there. Going back to the process table, you'll see again some of this lockd is those are more NFS specific RPCIOD. Again, kernel remote procedure calls, syslog that's monitoring your logging and stuff, and you can configure remote logging and everything else like that. We don't crond, again, running your cron jobs, inetd, your incoming connections, FTP, POP3, so on. YP bind. Everyone know what YP bind is? Okay, we run a NIST server, Network Information Services, I guess is what it stands for. For instance, our password file. If you looked at my password file, or the shadow file when I brought it up, you saw there wasn't a lot of users in it. We actually have another machine, Equity, which is our main home directory store, and it's also our NIST master. And so we're binding to that service. You'll see we're running MSQL from Hughes Technology. We started using that several years ago. MySQL was in its infancy, wasn't very well developed. It worked great, it was fast, it did everything we wanted it to do, so we used it. Then we started looking at new applications, we wanted some more stuff, so we went and started using MySQL as well. So we're using both, mainly because I think that John uses MSQL as well as I, and we have MySQL available. I'm using it for some things, but it's sort of like we just haven't switched yet. And MSQL is not insecure, it's pretty stable. We don't have remote access allowed to it, so it's not really an issue. Again, port map, great application to block and host allow. Windows NT uses port mapper too. Who knew that? Huh? You ever do a port scan of your Windows NT box? Sure. They use port mapper. Absolutely. Port map allows a service to connect. A really classic application that uses port mapper RPC type services is Microsoft Exchange. Microsoft Exchange is pretty neat because that whenever you connect to your Exchange server, the port mapper has to tell the client what ports to use to connect to the Exchange server. You know, has anyone ever realized that? Well, you might not because you don't notice it. It's blind to you that it changes ports. That's one of the reasons why Exchange is a beast to use with a firewall, because it changes ports. There's actually documentation that you can download from Microsoft's website. They don't recommend it, but you can actually fix the ports that Exchange uses, and then you could actually, you still need port mapper though, because you still need port mapper to respond to the clients to always tell them, look on this port, but you still need that. Port mapper, a lot of problems on the Unix world, and a lot of problems in the Windows NT world. They've had problems with port mapper. Sun developed it. Thanks again, Jerry. RPC stat D, again, RPC stat D, RPC mount D, NFSD. These are all part of kernel level and user land services to provide NFS services, network file system. Those were what I was showing you before about auto mount, being able to access remote files in a remote directory. So those services are there. We make them available mainly for backup purposes. CAMWall does not back up. Another machine backs up. It does it via over NFS. It's not that efficient, but it was the cheapest way to do it. MinGetty, that's just your actual console login. You'll notice you don't see a lot of console logins by default when you install most, if not all, Linux distributions. It puts a console on all, like 6 console logins. Alt F1, Alt F2, Alt F3, Alt F4. I never need more than a couple. So I go in to init tab in the etc directory. I comment out the lines, and then I init Q to reload. And so I drop them out. A little bit of memory gets freed up. Name D, name server that we are running, mainly because we not only provide DNS services for everyone in our building, but we also host outside domains for web hosting. We do virtual web hosting and stuff, and so we're a primary DNS server within our NIC to handle some of those domains that we're running too. That's the reason why. We also run Squid. All of our student computers are on a restricted network that has no access to the outside world. So they all have to run through our proxy server to get access out. It's nice. Big Brother's watching, right? Aren't we always? But the downside is with that type of setup is that sometimes we have a hard time. We do not use the proprietary Westlaw and Lexis clients in our labs because they simply won't work because they change IPs too quickly. TD, who runs our routers, won't put host names in the access control list. They want IPs. We have one IP for West and one IP for Lexis in the access lists. And I would say service through that one IP is probably 30% reliable. And so we have web access to both of those services. That's a little bit of a downside. Below that, we get into other services, SMB and NMB. You'll notice we don't have a lot of SMB processes running, like if you had a heavily loaded machine. That's because it's a Saturday, it's summertime, and the only SMB service that really comes off of this machine is our printing. For our labs, they use SMB to do that. I'm going to show you that a little bit too. LPD, waiting. We're using LPRNG on this 6.2 machine, which for those of you who are in the know, 6.2 came with Berkeley LPD. We scratched that. We had a lot of problems when we went with LPRNG. Now Red Hat then decided for 7.0 they would make LPRNG the default. And what we've done with that is configured that so that by default, I believe it allows everyone to connect to your machine. Through that, what we did is we made LPD to run as, by putting U in front of the PS, you'll see that LPD actually runs as its own user, LPR. It runs on a port above 1,000. What that means is somebody hacked our LP server, they would get no further than the user LPR. They wouldn't get root, which is the default. In most Unix installations, we change that to make things a little bit more secure. The downside is that for computers to connect to us to print, they have to make changes to their printing configuration to print to a higher port number. The service below that is scanlogd. That's a port scan logger. If anyone attempts to port scan us, it logs their attempt. It's a pretty neat thing. Sendmail, again, DHCP, HTTP, mGetty. That's providing our 800 number services. And we can see that John is logged in back over there. And that's it for that. Now, let's look at, I want to just show something here if I can get, if I remember correctly. I got to remember that one. Okay. What we've done here is we're going to move into the mGetty send fax. I know that Joe had expressed interest in our 800 number setup, so I'm just going to show that real quick. In this directory here, this is a default install. You have what you can do your dial-in config, your mGetty config, and everything else. Pretty straightforward stuff. The only thing that you have to do is really modify login config. And what this does here is set up PPP with PAT for login, which is basically the default in Windows 95, Windows 98, Windows 2000, everything to do a PAT login. What this does is it looks to see if a PPP request is being made, and if so, switch to the PPP mode and authenticate. This is the default for everything else, and it's sbin mGetty to allow you to do a console login if you wanted to. We actually go back and forth between allowing whether or not to let you log in via regular console and not log in via regular console. And the way to do that really simple is to change sbin mGetty to say, well, in this case, bin mGetty login, which I think is something I wrote, which tells you, sorry, you're not allowed to log in, and then hangs up the user. Now, on top of that, you have what's called, in older versions, and older being quite a few releases ago, in the etc directory, you had a pam.conf file. That was your configuration file for PAM, pluggable authentication modules. I'm going to show you then how you can configure them. They're pretty neat. Now you move to a directory syntax where each service has a file name. So let's look at PPP, some of the things you can do with that. Okay, now, with our PPP services, what we've done here is require that PAM tally passes. What that does is log failed attempts. So I think there's something not showing on the screen there. Yeah, down below. But what this does is every time you log in, it makes a record of your attempt. Then we require, using another auth required, it's called list file, item equals user, which means the user must appear in the file that we call etc dial-in users. It's a standard text file, one username per line. In order to use PPP services, the user has to be listed in that file. The reason being is because we didn't want everyone on our machine to be able to use the 800 dial-up services. We instead wanted to explicitly allow them to have access to that. Again, no login is required. That just checks to see if there's a file in the etc. directory that would block all login type services to machine. For instance, when you initiate a shutdown and stuff, it'll create that file, prevent other people from logging in. You'll see PAM RU, so that's actually our auth, our main auth. That's the Rutgers junk that does the single sign-on Kerberos login. And then here's the other thing too, which is that if you have more than 5 failures, 5 password attempts, lock you out from using the system at all. That's pretty cool. Because since we use PAM for all of our authentication type services, every single one of them has PAM tally lines. So that if someone tries to log in as a user with service X and they try too many times, it locks the account. And if they switch over to service Y, the account's still locked. And then we have a cron job that runs to periodically clean that out. Just like in NT, you can say, after half an hour or what have you, unlock the account. We do the same type of thing. Okay, any questions at this point? Am I boring the heck out of everyone? Is the
R8 0.1 provide TCP wrapper and is it in?
Yes, yeah, they all. I mean, most distributions have had TCP wrappers for a long time, but by default, they're not locked down. The host deny, host allow file will usually have nothing in them. I believe that's the default. They're completely blank. So. Again, we were talking before about Mandrake being a little bit ahead of the curve. The nice thing, though, is that with Red Hat now in 7.1, especially with the firewall configuration, if you turn on high firewall or stuff, it blocks a lot of stuff anyway. So you're pretty okay there. Obviously, is there anything that anyone would like me to cover, and besides just going through like the rant?
How difficult is it to install some kind of TCP wrappers, or in general, how difficult is it to install
any application? Yeah.
Because we found problems doing that in terms of stuff. You said you got CD-ROM wrapped at 15,000 RPMs. Where do you start?
Right. I mean, that's a good point. One thing to note is that I personally think that either Debian or Red Hat have for the most part, pretty nice package management systems. A lot of the vendors, for instance, Corel, were perfect with their Office 2000 suite available for Linux. They have a slew of RPM files that come on a disk, but they also have an install program to go around that. Now, if you were to get something like a power disk or an application disk, and you were to see a slew of RPM files, I think for the novice user or the introductory user getting used to it, or for just peace of mind, the easiest thing to do would be to install the RPM. Now, there's a couple of different things that you can do with RPM. I don't know if you can see the screen here, but one of them is RPM QPL. Is this high enough up, or should I try to make it higher? I'm trying to think, how can I do this? Is that high enough? Can we see that? Okay. Up at the top, and what that means is query package list, which would list all the files in a package that would be supplied as an argument. For instance, that would tell you what files it was going to place on your file system. The other thing is QPI, which would show you when you build an RPM file, you can put information in that file, a description, any other relevant information you wanted to put. So for instance, if you had a directory of 20 RPM files and you're like, I don't know what this one RPM is versus the other one, you could type RPM QPI and then the name of the RPM file, and it would tell you a little bit of information about it. What the P means packaged, so that would be if you were going to look at an uninstalled application. If you just leave the P out, I don't even know. Somebody back there needs a good thrashing. If you were going to do RPM QI, that would tell you information about an already installed package. So for instance, if you did PAM, you would see that, let's get this up a little bit higher so you can see, that it would tell you, description, PAM, pluggable authentication modules. This is a system security tool, blah, 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 blah. It tells you a URL to go to get more information. It tells you a summary, the license that it's under, the size of it. It tells you the build host, the vendor and everything else. So this is a pretty neat tool. I'm sure, I don't know off the top of my head if dselect has something equivalent, but if you're at the command line, you can use this to query and get relevant information about a package. And again, if you did QL without the P, and then you could more if there's too many files, it'll show you everything it does by default of files. And there's other commands that you can do to query and everything else. So to answer your question, if the documentation was poor with the CD-ROM that you received, if it was just a bunch of files you didn't know which ones you wanted to install or which files were really what applications, you could probably run through that command, get your information, and then installing is just a matter of RPM -I, which if you will see, will tell you no package is given for install. And then you can do other options to that, like V for verbose, and so on and so on and so on, to get more information. It can tell you, how far away it's done on installing the application, 10%, 20%. The new RPMs 4, which came out, which was a little bit headache-inducing, actually is quite nice in terms of showing you progress. Now, these are all command line tools. There are, which I don't have, probably on this machine. Let's see if I can get. I have never used, let's see something here. Just give me a second, because unfortunately I usually use the command line. I think I purposely removed the GUI RPM manager, and I don't even want to spend my time. I know there's no RPM, but at any rate, the point is that in the default install, there's graphical clients to manage RPM. So if you would put a CD-ROM in your CD-ROM drive, you could load the graphical application and then navigate through. Even in known, and I think KDE's file manager, if you had an RPM file and you went to the home directory, if you brought up your home directory like this, and let's see if I can find
K-package.
K-package, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Thank you. You could bring up K-package, which is integrated within your, anyway, there you go. Breakdown by categories of RPMs installed, so on and so on. So you can see that, and there's all kinds of settings, which I've never played with, but look at that, DB and stuff built in. That's pretty cool. So anyway, the point being that there are graphical equivalents to command line equivalents. So you can do those types of things. Again, I found the nice thing about the graphical equivalent is that it gives you a better bird's eye view of different package groupings. When I uninstalled WordPerfect 2000 and I wanted to make sure I removed every last piece of what came with it, it was all nicely packaged into its own group, and so was easily selectable and removable, or in your desire, installable too as well. So it's pretty nice. Any other questions?
Yes, I wonder if you can cover the mirror for hard drive.
Okay. Well, on our system here, we use hardware RAID, which is specific to the actual vendor of the hardware controller. On this machine, we're using American Megatrends RAID controller. On it's rebranded PERC 2 by Dell, but it's American Megatrends. On another machine, we're using DPT, which is now Adaptec, I think, right? Adaptec bought them too. Adaptec bought them. So we're using DPT now, Adaptec controller on another machine, and then on another machine we're using another DPT controller. So we actually have two DPT controllers and the American Megatrends controller. I think that if you already have SCSI hard drives and you don't mind losing a little bit of space, especially if you're going to go with RAID 5 per se, which you're going to lose one of your disk drives, but I think it's cheap now for hard drives, and a RAID controller is pretty cheap. And you can get a RAID controller, a real good RAID controller, for under $500 nowadays. You can even do IDE RAID if you want. There's Promise, I think, makes a IDE RAID controller. You can just you could buy two 60 gig IDE drives for $150 and buy an IDE RAID controller probably for a couple $100, and for maybe under $600, you'd have 60 gig mirrored on your computer, which would give you, obviously, a nice level of redundancy there. In our case, we have hot-swap hard drives and automatic rebuilding and everything else. We don't use software RAID, which is available. I think that you can, by default, I think you can pick that now on some of the installs. Probably Mandrake probably gives you the ability to do software RAID. I was never a big fan in disk compression. I'm not a big fan of software RAID. I think that's something that's better done in hardware. Software RAID is a stopgap. It's for those people who can't afford the hardware controller. But obviously, most of us are on somebody else's budget, and sometimes there might be $200 or $500 to buy a RAID controller. Regardless of whether you're using Linux or NT or Solaris or any operating system, if it's a server that you want up 100% of the time, a RAID controller is a beautiful investment. Any other questions? Anyone want to see some more technical stuff, or you just want to call it quits 15 minutes early? Keep going. Oh, great. Okay. That was odd there. I don't know what's going on.
Can I go back to the cron allow thing that you were talking about way back when?
Okay.
Does that affect every single cron job that runs on the box?
It would only affect user cron tabs.
Oh, okay.
But that's all that an individual user has the ability to edit.
Okay.
So if you're root and you modify a file that root's allowed to edit, such as one of the cron, either the main cron tab or cron daily, cron monthly, whatever, then obviously you can specify in that file to run as user XYZ, and it's still going to run as user XYZ. What cron allow does is make it so that the ordinary user gets told you're not allowed to use this program. Okay? So basically what you're doing is you're still allowing, and that's sort of a large issue of debate right now, is the concept of super user. And if you look at what the NSA is doing with secure Linux and other groups and roles and privileges and everything else like that, in terms of making the super user, not such a super user. Like in NT, you have the super user who can do everything. But then you have other concepts, backup, power user, so on and so on and so on. So in this case, all this does would disallow the individual user from actually using the cron tab command, but still having the cron tab command available for, let's say, root. If a root wanted to edit somebody else's cron tab. Like if I was root, I could do cron tab -e space another person's name, edit a file for them, and it would still work just fine. But it takes or I could list a few people in the cron tab file that I wanted to allow to run the program, and they could run it as well. But I still recommend that everyone who has cron tab installed to do that. Now you might say, geez, I don't allow users to log into my box. I don't need to block them from using cron tab. And to that respect, I mention again the story I told you about the hacker. The person came in through the web server, which is technically a user on the machine, right? It's either nobody, or it's www, or it's web, or it's whatever you've set up the web server process to run under. It's still technically a user on the system and has all rights and privileges thereof once they exploit a shell. Most hacks that are done through the web are hacks where they get shell access of some sort, or the ability to just fire off one shell command, and then they exploit something else on the machine. Cron tab in that case. Or SU, SU had some holes and other types of applications like that.
Is there software built-in in 721 R8 to do a mirror? Instead of going for the RAID controller?
Is software? That's a good question. Okay, another one you can do is man-k. Let's do RAID. Yeah, does anyone know that?
This is back on the cron.
Well, I know, but I want to. Can we just? There's software available for software RAID. I'm not 100% sure whether or not when you install it, if it gives you the choice to choose to do a software RAID. And I think part of the problem is that software RAID is a much trickier beast to install. I think that if done right for the average user, the best place to do it is on installation. Because at that point, your installation, you're let's say your driving force medium, right, is still not the hard drive. It's the CD-ROM drive. It's memory. So that's the best point to load, to split your hard drives into partitions. In other words, to get root. The root meaning the root file system on your software RAID. If you implement software RAID down the line, it's a pain in the... you can't convert your root file system to software RAID, at least not the last time I looked, without doing a reinstall. So I think that if to answer that question, I don't know off the top of my head, but if I had a Red Hat 7.1 disk, I could tell you in 10 minutes whether or not that was possible. And since none of us here know, if you want, you can come up and you can try it yourself, or if you want, you can just give me your email address. When I get back to the office on Monday, I'll try it and send you an email and let you know. Joe? No, it would be, in the later cases, it would probably be a module that would just be loadable, which if it was available in the installation process, it would be tagged as a module. You could recompile the kernel, but I think recompiling the kernel is something that's left for a lesson. We could actually do like a 2-hour talk on recompiling the kernel, especially if you weren't really already intimately familiar with that. And then there's that great debate of modules or no modules. I'm a believer in no modules. So at least for servers. For workstations, I use modules. But for servers, no modules. I talked to someone and said, well, geez, wouldn't it be nice if you had your SCSI controller as a module? And I was like, oh, yeah, so I could unload it when the machine was running. Yeah, that's real good, So, or your network controller. Wouldn't that be nice if you could remove your network controller? I'm like, yeah, in the off chance it stops responding and reloading the module will fix it. Now, I always think modules are for conserving resources. That's what they're all about, is making it run better on a lower machine. And on a server, you're not loading. It's like, yeah, I've got a server. It's got modules to load my quick cam, my video camera, because I'm doing a lot with that on my server. It's like, but on my workstation, I have a scanner. I've got my little USB drive for my smart media. Yeah, modules work okay for that. For server, I'm not convinced. And that's a great debate. That's a debate people could have. Oh, I think modules are great. Oh, I think they're soft. It's like, okay. Everything has its purpose. NT has its purpose. Linux has its purpose, right? On and on and on. Any other questions?
Where would you get a list of services so that you can try and figure out what services you want to turn off?
Great. Okay, let's do something called check config list. Wait. Did I spell that wrong? Yes. Oh my God, I'm having a brain freeze here. Where's the... Wow, this is embarrassing. What's the name? Oh my God.
I didn't do this to embarrass you.
Yeah, I know, but I'm having this brain freeze. It's really embarrassing. There's a command. Damn it. Oh my God. Okay, in Red Hat land, somebody help me here. I'm forgetting. It's... Wait. You know what? Ha! I was right. It's chk config, but you can't... I didn't have it in my path as a normal user. Oh, wow. Okay, anyway. chk config list. There you go. All right? So, moral of the story is I'm not having a brain freeze on everything. Okay, well, here you go. Check config list. This is everything that's running through inetd that's compatible with inetd, which are all applications installed by default on Red Hat. Now, you might say, what's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Everyone know what that is? Those are run levels. Okay? The only ones you really need to concern yourself with, in my opinion, are 3, 5, maybe like 6 and 0. The other ones, you're not going to boot into. Okay? Those would be like single user, ready to die. 6 is reboot. 5 is X, and 3 is like multi-user. There's not really much difference between 3 and 5, except 5 is X running. And what this does is it lists all of the services, and then tells you what the status of that is on boot in each run level. So, quick example, main D, it's off in everything but multi-user, 3. Okay? Check config can be used to, if you look at the top, you can still see, you can delete a service completely, or you can set the level being on or off, or actually, I'm sorry, level being 0 through 6, service name on or off. Or reset, I think, is just turn on and then back, off and then on or whatever. So, that answers your question, right?
No.
Okay.
That's a good answer, and that's good information.
Okay.
But there are 22 Linux, there are probably 50 services, 75 services, I don't even know. How do you know which ones you need?
Oh, which ones you need? Well, that would be a question of what you're looking to do in your Linux box. If you're looking to run a web server, you probably... that's a good point. That's a really good point. How do you best answer that? I think that with 7.1, and I'm not sure with Mandrake.
Let's do 7.1 Red Hat.
Let's say 7.1 Red Hat. By default, the services are turned off that you don't need.
It's also turn off on the Mandrake.
He's pushing Mandrake. I'm not knocking Mandrake. You can go with Mandrake. Mandrake or Red Hat.
And if the service
Wait.
started during install, you will get a warning. It says this service will be started. You don't really need it.
Red Hat does the same thing. Red Hat does the same thing.
Yeah.
When you install it, you can configure this. But by default, it turns a lot of things off. This is kudzu. This was what I was telling you about before for device management. You can see it's running in 3 and 5. What that does is look for new hardware. And also the actions of existing hardware. Let's say you pull something out of your machine, you boot your machine. This will recognize that you've removed the device and ask you what you want to do about it. So it's kind of neat. But yeah, obviously you have to do investigations of each one. You could query the file with RPM to find out what the package is part of, or use kpackage to find out what that file was part of and read up on the description, obviously. But again, same thing be true of Windows NT. When you install Windows NT and it tells you, hey, do you want to install simple TCP/IP services? How many people say yes? How? Because you think, oh, I know that TCP/IP. I need that, right? Right, huh? Are you all embarrassed? Come on. You can't all be. Well, that's like daytime and echo and all that. What do you need that for? Right? But anyway, I'm just trying to say that people think it's confusing and stuff. Windows does everything behind the scenes and presents a mouse click for you to click, right? Hello. Does that mean that excuses all of us from reading about it, figuring out, hey, what's that scheduler? What's spool SS? What's WinLogin? What's all this stuff that's running? You just accept it, right? Because it's there. It's a mouse click. If it's a text line, it can get confusing. People, I'm not saying that, I know people that get confused. If it's not a mouse click, if they have to type something, oh my God, I don't want to type, I want to click. I'm so more happy turning a service off with a click than typing a command. And I don't know what the service does.
I think it's true that after you install it, you sort of go into the inetd.config. You go in there what kind of service you have. If you don't want it, you sort of turn it off.
Well, inetd, but see, that's different. Inetd is turned off by default. That should be clarified that there's actually separation there. Inetd is actually a service that runs. These are the boot up. This is actually what's happening on boot, run levels and stuff. Inetd would be network services. But what's important to realize is that network services live in both places. So you need to look at inetd or xinetd, which is a directory structure in 7.1. It's not the same. And you also need to look at your config, because I can tell you by looking at this that sendmail, portmap, ypserv, mysqld, smb, mainb, autofs, ldap, arcwatch, all that stuff, that's all network utilities. So these are network services that are provided in this file, or green and blue purple thing moving around, as well as what's in the other file, inetdconf. Again, services. You need to check both places. Again, for this, comment them out, and then you need the hub, the process. Everyone know what that is? Okay, so we're good there, right? All right. Again, explaining what things do really requires on what you want to do. What everyone should do, I think 7.1 and Mandrake have really done what should have been done a long time ago, which was turn everything off and require the user to say, I want that on. Again, I showed that with the etc. host deny and allow. Turn everything off and then specifically turn on that which you want, and that's the best method. Any other questions?
That cron.allow file.
Okay.
You have to be logging in. In other words, you have a service that's running as a user without privileges.
Right.
On a content.
Oh, sure. The same way that if you, let's say you have a web server running and you've got some Perl or you've got a C CGI, you can do system calls, exec calls. You can actually run the cron tab command through a Perl program. You could actually set up the web to run cron tab. If you can hack a CGI.
No, but what I'm The cron.allow restricts cron path to being run by a login, right?
By any user except root. Yes.
The concrete situation is we both run Mailman for our lists.
Okay.
Runs cron jobs.
Right. But the cron jobs are probably put in. See, that's and I'm not familiar with Mailman, but my guess is those cron jobs are not placed in. See, you have to there's a difference between having cron run as another user and adding cron jobs to run as a user. So if you as root put cron entries in to run as user Mailman, right? Those will work fine. But Mailman will not be able to edit the cron table.
I see.
Okay?
So we would just have to look.
Yes. Any other questions? Did you learn, and to be honest here, did anyone actually learn something?
Yeah.
All right. And everyone else that slept, good job. I'm glad someone got some rest. Okay, well that's it. We're done. Right? 1:30? Did I have to go to 2? It was 1:30? Yeah? All right, cool.
Be shut down in 1 minute.
Great. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the show. Let me just ask one more question. Which one did you like better, the first one or the second one? The second one? Should have probably done more of that? Oh well. Next year when I present for the 8th time on Linux, we'll cover that stuff.
You can run a demo. Like on the first one, and the second one, we can just go more in depth.
Oh yeah, we could do that. Yeah, that would work. Okay, yeah, everyone forget lunch. I mean, just forget it, you know? Actually, no, wait, don't forget it. Go get it, come back, and we'll talk more. In fact, anyone who wants to talk more about Linux, you know, we can.